Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into this, everyone. My name is Vince. I just want to welcome you to another presentation, Novedge's Best of the Best webinar series. We're really excited today not only to be presenting Rhino 5's latest features and updates included in the newest release, but to once again have Brian James from McNeel presenting for us. I just want to give a little background on Brian before we get started. He's a Rhino training specialist who works for McNeel Associates. In addition to that, he's a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design. So needless to say, he is truly an expert at Rhino. We're going to be in good hands. He's going to take us through and show us some really nice features. Additionally, before we get into this, we also have Pascal Gollet from McNeel. He'll be helping field questions. But I'll get into the questions here in a minute. Brian's going to speak for the next 40 minutes or so. During that time, everyone will be in listen-only mode, but please feel free to shoot your questions into the question box. After Brian's done with his presentation, we'll open it up for a Q&A, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. Additionally, during the actual presentation, Pascal will be fielding some of the questions, but not all of them, because we want to get to some at the end. We will be recording this webinar too. I'll give complete details on where you can find it and where it will be made available. But having said all that, I want to turn over to Brian so we can jump right into this presentation. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Vince.
Cool. I'm going to switch the screen to you and let you take it from here.
Okay. All right, and one moment, let me open up my audience view panel. So thank you everyone for attending this Novedge webinar on version 5. I have a little update of how fast my screen refreshes on your end, so I will try and go as slow as possible so that there's time for your connections to update. But please let me know if it's going a little too fast for you. So on the screen right now, I'll jump right in, is version 5 beta. Now the version 5 beta of Rhino is available for free download to anyone that has the version 4 license key of Rhino right now. And you can have both versions installed on your machine and use them at the same time even if you wanted to. So one of the things that I'd like to do in this web demonstration is focus on a new manipulator object that's in the version 5 beta of Rhino, and that's called the Gumball. And the Gumball is at the very bottom of the screen. You can turn it on just by clicking on where it says Gumball. You can make that highlighted. And if it's highlighted, then you'll have a manipulator object. So let me go into my layers here, and I'll show you what I plan on doing. So I'm going to show you a different way to model something like this. This will be a faucet and sink type combination. And typically you would model something like this in surfaces by lofting or creating blends. In this case, I'm going to try and model this more interactively using the Gumball Manipulator object. So let me go ahead and in my layers here, I'm just going to turn off everything but this initial curve and ZS and enter. That's zoom selected. I use that all the time. And I have the Gumball automatically displayed. So it's this manipulator object that you see on the screen right now. And it has several different elements to it. By default, you get the view and color of the Gumball that you see here, but you can change all this stuff, and I'll go through the settings later. But by default, you get translation, that's these arrows. You get rotation, which are the arcs, and you also get scaling, which are these dotted lines and small little squares. All right, so since this is a flat object, it's this planar curve right now, I only have scale in the X and Y. So I don't have any Z scaling right now because it's not three-dimensional. So the fun thing about the Gumball is that you can actually use it not only to translate, rotate, and scale objects, but you can use it to create geometry. So I'm going to start by making the base to the faucet part of this design. And I'll start to translate this curve just by left-clicking and dragging on the Z-axis of the Gumball. And I'll hold down the Control key, and then I'll release my mouse button. And after I did that, let me go into shaded mode just so it makes a little bit more sense in the beginning here. After I do that, I actually get a solid object just from a single planar curve. Now the fun thing is that if you just left-click on this, you select the entire polysurface as you normally would in Rhino. But if I hold down the Control and the Shift key and left-click, then I'm sub-object selecting this top trimmed surface. I can then start to scale by dragging on the scale manipulator for the Gumball. If I hold down the Shift key, I can scale in both X and Y at the same time, and then release the left mouse button, and I've created this trapezoidal type shape. Now if I want to make another piece of geometry, another extrusion off of this trimmed surface, I'm just going to wait for your screen to catch up here. I will start to translate it again up in the Z-axis, and then I'll hold down the Control key again, and then release the left mouse button. Now this is still a polysurface, and I don't have that interior surface anymore. If I go into wireframe mode, you can see that you don't have an interior surface. There's no ISO curve highlighted there. I'll go back into shaded mode. And wait for this to update. Okay, so you can continue on your merry way doing this type of push and pull interface, and it's a different way to model. It's more of an iterative modeling technique that I've been using a lot lately, and I wanted to show it to the community at large. You can continue by sub-object selecting that top face, scale it in, holding down the Shift key, and you can sub-object select this middle part as well, this middle seam in the polysurface. And you can translate that down in the Z-axis, scale it independently or uniformly in X and Y. So I want to make a little tiny relief on the top of this base. I want an indentation rather than a positive form. And sometimes in order to go down, you have to go up first, and that's what I'm about to do. If I Control-Shift sub-object select that top face, start to scale it in, hold down Shift to make it a uniform scaling, and then tap the Alt key, I'll see a plus symbol. I'll then release the left mouse button. I'll deselect everything, and now you can see that I've copied that face through the scale operation. So now I have a separate object. It's not a sub-object selection at this point because it's just a single trimmed surface. I'll then translate that up in the Z-axis, hold down the Control key, and release the left mouse button. This gives me a second solid object. Then I'll select both of these, and I'll do a Boolean union. And now they're one polysurface. And at this point, I can sub-object select, Control-Shift, left-click, uniformly scale, left-click and drag on the scale control on the Gumball, hold down the Shift key to make it uniform, and release the left mouse button. And now I can translate that face back down, and I can create that inset. Now the next thing that I want to do is create, since this line right here will actually be in contact with the top of the sink surface, I actually want a little bit of a lip there so it's not a knife edge. And so I'm first going to sub-object select this very bottom face and show you another way to translate. Let me wait for your screens to catch up here. So I've sub-object selected that very bottom face, and if I just left-click and release on the arrow for the Z-axis, I get a little field, and let me wait till it pops up there. And that field allows for numeric input, so I could type in, say, 0.2. And that's a little bit much, so I'll undo that. I'll do 0.1. Okay. So I just moved that up in the z-axis, 0.1. Now say I want a straight wall extrusion coming down. I can start to translate in the z-axis back down, straight down. But to make that a straight wall, rather than just moving that face, I'll type 0.1, and you can see 0.1 appears in the command line at this point. I'll press Enter, and now I'm limited to a 0.1 distance. I still have my finger depressed on the left mouse button. So if I hold down Control and then release, I make that straight extrusion. So it might seem awkward at first, but it's actually fairly easy to get the hang of. It's all going to happen with Control, Shift, Alt, and left mouse button combinations. So I moved up, and then I translated down using the Control key and a numeric extent. Now the next thing of the Gumball, next ability of the Gumball that I want to show you is one of my favorites, and that's to leave the alignment of the active construction plane. So everything that I've done so far, let me select these two top faces at the moment. Oh, and to make multiple selections, just continue clicking, or to remove from selection, just continue clicking. So that's with Control and Shift held down, so I can just continue to click. So if I have two multiple selections like this, I can translate them both at the same time, and I'll use my X rotation. But notice what happens, and let me zoom in here, and I'll wait for your screen to catch up just a little bit. Notice what happens. The Gumball actually stays aligned to the active construction plane. This is the default alignment for the Gumball Manipulator. And what I'd like to do is align it to the flat faces that are selected. And you could do this with a single face, but it'll also work with multiples. And if you click on that little white circle for the Gumball, just left click there, you get ability to change certain aspects of the Gumball, but also to align to object. So if I click Align to Object, now the Gumball is planar with those planar objects. And this will work with control point selections or curves that are planar. Anything that it can figure out the planar orientation of, you can align to that. It'll also align, interestingly enough, to the normal of a surface. So if you're using this on control points of a surface, the z-axis or the normal would be the z-axis for the Gumball. And now I can translate this or move it in a different orientation than the active construction plane. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to do is showcase an ability that's in the version 5 build of Rhino, and that is to shell polysurfaces. So this is something that's been requested for a long time in the development of Rhino, and now there is the ability to do it in version 5. So the command is shell polysurface, and you can click on thickness up at the top, and you can change the thickness that you'd like to offset to, and you can also click on a face to remove. So I want to remove this face right here, and maybe I'll make the thickness a little bit less due to the angle of that bottom, and then just enter. And let me wait for your screens to update here and rotate so you can see the bottom. So just shelled this polysurface, and now I have a wall thickness to it. Personally, I like to create these B-side surfaces before any fillets or blends occur on these top edges. The results are going to be more consistent, and we also don't really need as much curvature on the underside here. It keeps it much simpler, and so your results are much faster to calculate as well. So I have a shell thickness now, and now I'd like to beautify the top here. I'd like to make this transition between these sharp edges much rounder. I'm envisioning this design as being maybe milled and polished out of marble at the moment. So I'm going to use Extract SRF, which is just the right click over the explode icon, and I'll extract this first portion of the polysurface. So enter. So now that's a separate selection. And then I'm going to go into the Surfaces tab and use Match Surf. This is the icon for it. And Match Surf lets me pick an edge that I want to change and an edge I want to match. And enter. And here I can pick the type of continuity that I'd like, as well as whether or not to match or preserve isocurve direction. And now I get that nice tangent transition. I could have specified curvature as well into that surface there. I'm going to use extract SRF one more time on this ring here, and let me wait for your screen to catch up. On this surface right here, and I'll press enter, so that's extracted now. And now I'll use Match Surf with multiple matches. So up in the command line there's a multiple match command, or sub-command, and then it's just repeating the process. So that's the edge I want to change. That's the edge I want to match. Enter, and then immediately select the next edge I want to change and the next edge I want to match. Enter. And I have no more edges to select. I just want to do both at the same time, so I'll just press enter, and that will immediately bring up the match surface dialog. Immediately for me, and now for you. And here we get our continuity options again. I'll leave it on tangency still and say OK. Now I think for this top edge and this bottom edge, I'll just use fillet edge to add a little bit of variety here. So I'll join everything back together into a closed solid once again, and I'll go into the Solids tab, fillet edge. And that radius is far too large for these edges, and let me wait for your screen to catch up before I start changing this. So up in the command line I'll just click on Set All, and I'll type 0.08, and I can see that radius looks like it will have enough space to trim against the adjacent surfaces. And I'll click Preview and wait for your screen to catch up here. I want to show you one thing that's often overlooked with fillet edge. And that's that this fillet radius with the default style of rolling ball looks like it actually gets thinner here, and it really has to do with the angle that these two surfaces have with one another. So I'm going to go into the command line and change the rail type from rolling ball to distance between rails or distance from edge. I prefer distance between rails in this case, and it makes for a more consistent looking or more uniform looking fillet. And there we go. So let me go back to my layers here for 1 second, and I'm going to turn on some more curves that I have. So another set of curves that I have are for the actual faucet that will come out of this base here. And I want to showcase another method for modeling in V5 that was not possible in version 4, and that's to record history with sweep one rail. So many more commands are supporting the history option in Rhino, and so that's what I'm about to do. So I'm going to switch to a side view here. And you can see that, that I have this path curve, and I have these control points on it. And if I go into ghosted mode in the perspective view, maybe this will be a little bit easier. Yeah. Wait for your screen to catch up. I'll then record history by left-clicking on where it says Record History at the bottom of the screen. And then I'll go into my Surfaces tab and choose Sweep One Rail. So I'm going to be recording history for the Sweep One command. And I'll select the rail, and then I'll select the cross-sections. Press Enter, and Enter again, and I'll accept the style of freeform and do not simplify. Okay, so next I'm going to select the curves that made up that sweep, and I'm going to turn on the control points for them. And I'm waiting for your screen to catch up here. Okay, and I want to show you another ability in V5 before I start interactively updating this sweep, and that's to use the filter option. So also at the bottom of the screen you'll see the word filter. Filter will hide and show, as you left-click on it, a series of checkboxes that looks kind of like the object snap checkboxes. These are selection filters. So if I want to only select control points, I could left-click on these other boxes and manually deselect them. But I can also right-click over the checkbox for control points. And if I right-click over that checkbox, that's the only one selected. So now I can't select anything but control points. And this is another method for isolating your selection versus locking objects or putting them on locked layers. So it's selection filters, and you can hide and display those boxes with the filter word at the very bottom of the interface. So next I'm going to add a little bit more style to this faucet edge right here by selecting these control points and then scaling them with the gumball inward. And just wait for your screen to catch up. Alright, so that's using that scale tool on the gumball to do that. I'll then select these top two control points and then use the weight command. In the weight command you can think of like gravity for control points, and by default it is set at a maximum of 10, but you can enter any number you want there. So if I type 50, that increases the weight. And now I have this type of crease transitioning. I'll then select the control points at the bottom, and you'll notice that the alignment of my gumball is kind of skewed. Let me wait for this to catch up here. It's kind of skewed because I still have the align to object selected. So there's two options for me right now. I want to scale these uniformly in the world space, and I'm modeling around 0 here. So I have two options. I can either left-click on the little white circle again and choose Align to C-plane, and it will realign to the world XYZ, or the top construction planes XYZ, which are synonymous right now. Or if I have Align to Object and it's like this, I can use the command relocate gumball. So relocate gumball up in the command line will ask for a gumball origin, and I'll use a quad snap there. And then just my shift key, which is my ortho snap. And now that's aligned like so. And you'll notice that my arrow that allows me to scale in the Y direction right now, or my box that allows me to scale in the Y direction, is quite compressed to the origin at the moment of the gumball. To make that longer, I can hold down the Control key and then left-click and drag it. So that just repositioned the gumball scale handle. And now I have the ability to scale those with more freedom of movement. Like that. And you can see the sweep 1 is updating. And I'll do Align to C-plane here, just to change that performance. I'll often go back and forth between Align to Object and Align to C-plane. They both have their uses. And let me wait for your screen to catch up here. All right. So I'm going to tilt the faucet head a little bit here. Just make this more interesting design. And maybe just scale it slightly in. Okay, so I don't want to get too distracted with finagling my design here, so I'll just settle on something like this for now. And I'll turn off my control points. And one thing that I'll encourage you to always remember is that if you use selection filters, remember that you have them on. It's easy to forget that you have them on, so if you then try and select something like a curve or a surface, you won't be able to. It's because your selection filters are still limited to control points. So the fastest way to get back to the default of being able to select anything in the scene is to right-click over the one object type selected and then immediately left-click. So that was just right-click and left-click, and I'm back to my defaults. And I'll go back over to my layers, and I'll display the curves for my sink and my basin here. And it also looks like my faucet is just a little bit too wide right there, so let me scale this in, just like that. All right, a practical application of history on sweep 1. I legitimately needed to change that. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you is some additional history-enabled commands. So this approach will be to make a planar surface first, so I'll record history, and then I'll run planar SRF, and I'll use these two top curves to make a planar surface. So this is really the same as if I were to create a plane and then trim it, but all in one command. I'll then record history again, and I'll do a loft. And I'll select this series of curves. And in the loft options dialog, wait for this to come up, I'm going to choose the loose option and then update the preview so that as seen from the side view, and I'll wait for your screen to catch up. Sorry if that makes me sound like a broken record here. So that in the side view, the loose option doesn't hit this exact spot for the second curve, and so I won't have an undercut right at the edge there. So loose, and I won't simplify, and then I'll say OK. And so now I have history enabled for two separate commands, and both of those commands are using this top curve, actually all of the curves. So I'm going to select those two curves and turn on the control points for it. And just wait for the refresh. OK. And I can utilize my selection filters again. So now I can start to customize the transition. I'm going to hold down Shift and select two control points on either side of the center line of this design, and then just start using the gumball. And as I'm dragging those control points, it will update the loose loft and also the planar surf at the same time because history was enabled. So my goal here is to match the cutout of the basin to more closely reflect or to more closely resemble the line of the actual sink base, or the faucet base rather. Now at a certain point I might want very subtle control in editing these points, these control points. And so the next feature of the gumball that I want to show you is the ability to set what is called drag strength. So if I click in the little white circle again to bring up the options, you'll see set drag strength, and currently it's at 100%. That means that as I move my cursor, I'm moving the control points the same degree of strength. So if I click on set drag strength, you'll see 100% up in the command line is the default option. I'll set that to 50 and press enter. And now when I drag the gumball, I'm using it to manipulate those control points, but I have much finer control over the movement. So again, if I want even finer control, show you something really drastic here, I'll go down to 20%. And now as I'm dragging that, you can see how far my mouse cursor is. Hopefully you can see that. But it's making the control points move only a small distance. And that'll work for any of these manipulations, including the scaling or rotating, any of that stuff. And I'm moving these two rows that were involved in the loose loft, simply that we don't create an undercut by mistake. And I'll scale these in just slightly. And maybe run the weight command and actually reduce the weight a little bit. By default, all control points have a weight of 1, as you can see here in the Set Control Point Weight dialog. If I change that to maybe something around 0.7, I just get a softer round right there. So I'll turn off my control points and then get my filters back to the default. So I'll right-click over control points in the filter checkboxes and then left-click over control points. Okay, so it looks like I have about a little bit more time left. We're at 2:30, so let me continue with this model here, and I'll start by doing the edge real quick here, and that'll be with a loft just between that curve and that curve, and I'll do a normal style loft. And I'll also join these, all three of these, or actually just those two for now, join those together. And that will break the history. So if you want to save a version of this without the fillets first, then you can easily come back to it, but these are now finishing touches, so I'm fine with breaking the history. And that leaves this piece, this surface, without history as well, I believe. And let me double check that by just using match surf. So my next goal is this circle at the bottom here. I want to match it. And often match surf is looked at as a tool that matches between surfaces, which it does. But it can also be used to match a surface edge to a curve. And that's what I'll do here. So I'll click on match surf again, and then click on the curve as the section to match. And my continuity choice will be limited to position because the thing to match is just a curve. And I'll choose to refine match. This is important, otherwise the cutout won't actually look like a circle. This will add some control points. And that, I guess, broke the history for that particular loft surface, but I'll say OK. And I'll wait for your screens to catch up here. Okay, and now I can join all this together into one poly surface. And I'm going to use fillet edge. Fillet edge works just like it did in version 4, but it handles a lot more cases. It's definitely been an area of work for the development of version 5. And here I'm going to use it on these two edges. And I still have my distance between rails set. I want a variable radius here. Let me wait. There we go. Screen's caught up. I'm going to add a handle right here. And I'm going to change that handle just by dragging it slightly. There we go. So I'm going to toggle this and see what it looks like with the default of rolling ball as well. Actually looks quite similar. Let me see if rolling ball allows me to get just slightly larger there on the front part of it. And I think that looks pretty good. I have the preview equals yes at the moment. If you have preview equals no, just by left-clicking on that option in the command line, you can get much faster performance out of the fillet edge command, or at least the using of it. The preview of it won't have to be calculated. So just keep that in mind. But I like to have it on so that I can see whether or not it will trim properly and if there's enough space. So I'll say OK, and there we go. Now for this outer edge, I think I'll use just a regular uniform fillet. And there we go. And I think I want to angle the head of the faucet down a little bit. So I should still have history on for that. So I'll select that curve at the front of the faucet and then just use the gumball to rotate it. Now my dragging of this X rotation arc on the gumball was very slow to do that. And the reason Reason is that my set drag strength is still at 20%. So I'll go back to the settings and set that back to 100. Just like that. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. In the remaining 5 or 6 minutes that I have, I want to cover the Gumball settings, and I also want to cover some display mode stuff. So here goes. Hopefully the screen can keep up with the speed. So if I make the Gumball appear again, I will click on the little white circle, just left click in there, and select Settings from that pop-up menu. And this will open up the Gumball settings that are in the Rhino options. So that's under Rhino options, modeling aids, Gumball. And here you can customize pretty much everything about how the Gumball looks. So what I'm going to do, one thing that I like to do is that menu ball size where we get the settings and those other options, I typically like to make that a little bit larger and then also change its location. So these are going to make it a little bit easier to click on, and the menu ball color, I'll make that black just to give you an example. Say OK, and so now you can see that that settings Gumball is much larger and much easier, or you can't see it just yet. Now you can. That settings option is now much easier for me to click. So you can customize this to your own eyesight and use it in an interactive way to model like this. It should be noted, though I don't believe I have time to show it here. No, I do have time. So I'll go to the Mesh drop-down menu, and I'll make a sphere. So it's a mesh object. Let me zoom selected and wait for your screen to catch up here. And I'll go into flat shade mode. Just so that you can see this. So the facets of this mesh object are individually selectable as sub-objects. So even though it's a mesh object, so the Gumball is very, very flexible in terms of the types of geometry you can use it on. So if I hold down Control-Shift, I can get edge selections or face selections. And I think to get the face selections, I actually need to be in shaded mode here. And then I can align to Object. And you can Control-Shift to add, Control-Shift to remove. And the same goes as the other examples of how to use the Gumball. If I hold down the Control key, I actually create a mesh extrusion from that face. So just so that you can see the power of the Gumball, it not only works on NURBS objects, but also mesh objects that you might have imported. Okay, let me turn off flat shade and zoom extents all viewports. Another macro I use all the time, ZEA, and enter. And your screen is caught up. The last couple bits that I want to show you in the version 5 beta, and there's really much more than I can show in this brief time. But one thing that I'd like to show you right here is that you have a variety of display options in V5. So by default, you've got your standard wireframe, shaded, rendered, but you also have a mode called rendered shadows. So if I go into rendered shadow mode, let me make sure that the screen updates. Okay, if I go into rendered shadow mode, I actually see shadows in the viewport, and by default it uses the modeling lights. So you have a couple modeling lights, maybe 3 now I think in V5 actually, to light the model, and you get shadows from I believe one of those, but I'm treading on an area I'm not exactly sure about. So you get shadows basically with rendered shadow mode, and you have the option of a few other types of lighting techniques that you could use here. So in order to show you these, I have to talk about what are called panels. So object properties before was a docked window on the side of the interface, and now it's a panel. This panel is also available from the panel's drop-down menu. You can have a variety of different panels displayed, and those will be these other panel tabs that are right to the right of properties. So one of the tabs that you can display is called the sun. So if I go over to the sun, and this is with Rhino Render as the active render engine. The active render engine will determine what tabs, what panels you actually have access to. So this is with Rhino Render as the active render engine. I can turn on the sun object, and the sun object allows me to position the sun either manually or by date and time, and also location. Using this map down here, I can pick a location and then the time of day. Or you can click Now and use your system time. And let me make sure that updates for you. Now you'll notice one thing about the rendered shadow viewport at the moment is that the shadow is very dark underneath, and if we turn on the skylight, now that's not as dark. And I'll wait for that to catch up, and there you go. Now I want to show you how you can texture map in version 5. So I mentioned this earlier in the demonstration that I want these this basin and sink to be a marble material. So what I'm going to do is just leave rendered shadow mode and go into just regular rendered mode for a second. And in the materials panel, here, I'm going to drag and drop a basic material for both the sink basin and the base of the faucet. It looks like GoToMeeting is freezing up on me here. Apologize, a little technical difficulty. It's just stuck at the moment, so I'm trying to get it back. This is the danger of live demonstration.
Brian, I think
All right.
I think I can see. Yeah, it looks fine on our end. I don't know if your viewers what's slowing down. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you see me relaunching Rhino 5 now?
Yeah, everyone can see that.
Okay. Yeah. So Gumball just sort of, or the GoToMeeting rather, just sort of seemed to be interfering with my screen rotation in Rhino. Never seen that before, but anyways. Luckily, I have a saved version of the file. So let me see. Here it is. And this will save me a little bit of time, and then we can go straight to questions. Okay, so what I'd like to show you is that if I select this object and I'll invert and then hide and zoom selected, okay, and I'm going to turn off the ground plane object for a second. There's a ground plane as well. So if I go into object properties and I select an object, before you had a drop-down list with texture mapping choices. Now you have this icon for texture mapping. And I'm going to delete my mapping for a second. You have the primitives of surface, planar, box, sphere, cylinder, but you also have these two new icons. One is called unwrap. The other is a custom mapping object. I'm going to show you unwrap here. So if I click unwrap, the command line asks for seams. So these are any seams in the polysurface that I will allow Rhino to rip apart. Okay, and I'm going to select this bottom seam right here and say OK. All right, and now I can go into a rendered mode, and you can see that we have one texture. In this case, I've applied a texture, in a basic material of a marble texture. So there's a whole bunch of different textures in version 5, and some of these are procedural textures like marble. So if I change this to be 4x4, you can see that it updates. Let me make sure that your screen is keeping up with this. Looks good so far. Okay. Now if you had a regular surface mapping method, which is the default, you would see it break. This texture would break as it passes between the seams and the polysurface. So let me go back to the texture mapping, and I'll change it to surface mapping just so you can see that. So that's the problem with mapping with just primitives, is that if we used a plane or a box or a sphere, we wouldn't actually get a continuous display of that texture across that seam. So if you do unwrap and you select the edge that you allow Rhino to rip apart and then say enter, it creates a custom UV space. Now what does that custom UV space look like? You can see that if you click on the UV editor choice and then drag out a rectangle or a square. And let me wait for your screen to catch up. Looks like it's not catching up. There we go. Okay, so the UV editor allows you to preview the flattened render meshes, and you can see them right there. So each one of these, one is for the exterior and one is for the interior of the model. And anything that you'd like to do here in the UV editor space can also be done with the Gumball. So you can reposition those flattened meshes. And these are the way that any texture in any material will get applied. And this information will travel with 3DM files as part of the render mesh, but it also travels with, say, the OBJ file format when you check texture coordinate space as one of the attributes to transfer. And I'm still in the UV editor, so over on the right side of the screen I'll have to click Apply to keep those changes. Let me show the rest of my objects here, and then I'll go into a rendered shadow mode. And rendered shadow mode, in this case, let me wait for your screen to catch up. Rendered shadow mode in this case is also using a high dynamic range image as the environment. So in the environment panel, you can load a high dynamic range image into the background image channel of a basic environment. And these high dynamic range images, you can find a whole bunch for free on the website Food for Rhino, and that's food number 4 Rhino. And if you do that, and then you increase the reflection of the material, then in rendered shadow mode it will reflect it. Let me turn on my ground plane as well. And lastly, that's a very quick introduction to the rendered shadow mode, but lastly, I want to show you a couple other display modes that you have available to you. One is called Artistic. Let me go into that. And I'll turn on the sun and the skylight here, and I'm waiting for your screen to catch up. Okay, so the artistic mode looks just like this. It's more of a charcoal wash or a soft pencil drawing, and this is really just a customized technical view display mode. So you can make this on your own or a variation of this on your own in options very easily, and the way things look will change depending on the lighting you have set, such as the sun or the skylight being on. It's essentially a custom technical view with shadows. Another display mode that is available to you is called Pen, and wait for it to catch up. And this again is a customized technical display mode. So Vince, we've got about 10 minutes left. Would you like to do Q&A right now?
Yeah, go. Let's jump into some questions here. Let's get to see here. First one we'll get to. Here's one from John. He says, how do I increase the accuracy of Gumball? He says he often uses Gumball to move an object by first measuring the distance between two objects.
Oh, I understand.
Then when I try to
Okay.
type this in the Gumball, it moves, but it does not exact locations. Is that
So
clear?
if you just left-click and release on the translation arrow, for instance, of the Gumball, you can type in a numeric amount. So just left-click and release. So I have, let me disable my ground plane here so that you can see the arrows. One moment. Okay. Wait for your screen to catch up. So if you have a translation arrow, you just left-click and release on it, and you will see a numeric field. That numeric field, you can then type in a value. And you can use that same technique when extruding as well using the control key. Okay. The same will go for the rotation controls or the scale controls. If you want to scale something to half its size, you just left-click release on the scale handle and type in 0.5, and you'd scale it to half its size. Another question?
Yeah, I just want to give a quick heads up to everyone. Pascal Gollet, who's also from McNeel, is also online, so he can help field some questions. I don't know if he's online with his mic.
I just unmuted. Do you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, if you want to chime in too and help out with some of these questions, feel free.
That last question, Brian, the snappy smooth setting may also be what the user's looking for there.
Oh, true. There's another option for snappy dragging, which is not only fun to say, but it will use your snaps, or smooth dragging. Personally, I generally have it on smooth dragging, but those options are there.
Right. To hit no exact location, though, you may want snappy.
Right. Right. Unless you know that Cartesian coordinate, but feel free to always email us as well. If you email tech, T-E-C-H, at McNeel, M-C-N-E-E-L.com, a whole bunch of us see that on a daily basis and be happy to answer any questions as you hit them. Any other questions, Vince?
Yeah, we got a bunch. The first one I think we got to get to because we have a bunch of people asking is there a release date announced for Rhino 5? Anything tentative?
Well, since Pascal has seniority, I think he can answer.
Yeah,
that.
Should we defer to him on this? Okay.
Yeah, we should defer to Pascal.
Okay, Pascal, do you have any insights?
The answer is
Okay. Okay.
we're working hard on it. We would like to get it out sooner even than you would like to get it out, but we don't have a date.
Okay, yeah, so sounds good. Let's see here. Let's get to another one. Here's one from Bob. He's asking, how do the rendering features in Rhino 5 compare to Flamingo or other rendering plugins? Do you
want me to do that one, Pascal?
Sure.
They're very basic, but they're much better than they were in version 4. So that skylight option that I showed in rendered shadow mode, that'll work for the default Rhino render engine as well. And that skylight is going to be a uniform lighting around the scene. And it will use the high dynamic range environment too for reflections if you add one. So that said, it's already worlds better than the version 4 one, but it's still very, very basic. So if you have a need to do a lot of really nice images, then I would suggest getting a render plugin, and there's a whole bunch of options. Flamingo NXT is a great one if you don't want to spend a lot of time tweaking stuff, and if you want all the controls and then some, go for something like Maxwell, Brazil, or V-Ray.
Yeah, here's a follow-up, I guess, to that. You mentioned V-Ray. Antonio was asking, is the mapping mode compatible with V-Ray?
I think it should be, because if the render engine takes the render meshes, then I believe that UV space is also part of the render mesh. If it's not, I'm sure it's something that the developers of V-Ray can pay attention to if they're not already. I would have to test it to be absolutely sure, but my guess is yes.
Okay, here's one. Let's get to this one from Curtis. It says, when you fill up the faucet base class as a surface, what happened to the inside surfaces? did they update and keep uniform shell? Is that
No,
clear?
the inside surfaces, those interior surfaces from the shell did not get changed. So those interior surfaces still have a sharp edge. And personally, I like that sharp edge because that's one less pass that, say, a mill would have to make. But if you actually needed some sort of depth of, if you needed some sort of draft to pull out of a tool or something, then depending on how that was made, then yes, you'd have to go into that interior part and fillet or blend that edge separately.
One other possibility is to simply shell it after the filleting.
Yes, you could. Now, I find a faster performance and less likelihood of a problem that you'd have to manually fix if you do the shelling on a linear version first. It's just my technique personally, but you could absolutely fillet and round things and then try the shelling. But keep in mind you may get a naked edge somewhere if you're shelling at a thickness greater than on a degree of curvature. Say of a really tight area, it might cross itself and create an inaccurate result that you'd have to repair manually. Just keep that in mind.
Right, that's true of any shelling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's not a silver bullet or magic, always perfect shell thing. But it definitely helps. You don't have to model the whole thing on the interior.
Great. We'll just get to a couple more here. This one's from Randy, and
Okay.
he's asking, does it all apply to the Gumball plugin in Rhino 4, or is it specific to Rhino 5?
It's specific to V5. There's no Gumball option at the bottom of the interface in version 4. It's the manipulator object in version 5. And I believe at one point it was called gimbal, like a gimbal joint. And is that true, Pascal? And it was just mispronounced enough times?
Yeah, it was just Dale calling it Gumball. But as far as V4 goes, there was a sort of a proof of concept plugin available for V4 on the labs page. This is much more sophisticated than that. The version 5 version of it has much more control. What you saw today would not, only some of it would be possible in the V4 trial plugin.
Right.
If that answers that original question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see here. Here's one from Andrew. He says, can you display vertex colors in the artistic display mode?
Good question. I think you probably would have to. I think you might have to use the vertex color shader, which I believe is now by default in version 5. I know it was a custom shader type for the Brazil render engine. Feel free to email me an example model and I can figure out how you can do it. My guess is that yes, you could make it so that you could see it as a texture.
Cool. Then Andrew followed up and said he will email you. So,
Okay.
Yeah, we'll hope you guys can get that straightened out. We'll just get to a couple more questions. Here's one. What seam would you choose when unwrapping a torus, for example?
The seam around the cross section of it, so what would be like a circle or an ellipse, and then also I might split by isocurve. So if you split by isocurve along one of the larger loops, and then select those two, maybe it would just be easier to show you. So let me make a torus. So I'd select both of these seams. So let me sub-object select both of them just for illustration purposes, and you'll see them highlighted there on your screen in 1 second. So if you select both of those, you'll just get a flattened render mesh. UV unwrapping is an art unto itself. The implementation in V5 Rhino is very simple, and you don't have to know a lot about UV unwrapping to actually make this work. It's really nice and definitely helps texturing poly surfaces.
All right, and then we'll just get to one last question here. This one's from Nathan, and I know I've looked for this in the past and not been able to find it, but for both of you, does McNeel offer training in San Diego or the San Diego area?
I don't know, Pascal, do we?
We, as McNeel, do not. Resellers may have training down there, and that would be on our training webpage. You can check our website and look for different locations. I don't know of any specifically in San Diego. That may turn up once in a while.
All right, so I think we'll wrap it there. We're a little over an hour. I'm going to switch the screen back over to me and give a little send-off before we take off here. So again, I want to thank both Brian and Pascal. Tremendous presentation. I'm sure everyone out there enjoyed it as much as I did. And I want to thank everyone for attending another presentation, Novedge's Best of the Best webinar series. Before we go here, I just want to give a little background in case anyone's unfamiliar with us here at Novedge. We're the leading online design software superstore. Not only do we have the best prices around, but our staff is extremely awesome, incredibly knowledgeable. We'd love for you to call, chat with us at any time. We do have Rhino 4, as you might have expected. My colleague Bob Thayer, his email is on the screen there. If you have any questions about Rhino or any of the McNeel products, feel free to email him, and he'll definitely get back to you as soon as he can with any questions about pricing or training manuals, stuff of that sort. And the last thing I want to touch on before we sign off here is a little online community we've created here at Novedge called Rhino Jungle. It's essentially an online community, as I said, for Rhino users to come and collaborate, network with others. I know Pascal's a member, and Brian, are you a member? I don't remember exactly, but I know we have.
Oh, yes, I believe I am.
Yeah, so we have a ton of Rhino users, knowledgeable Rhino users. It's a great way to find news, trends, tutorials, videos, all things Rhino related. This webinar will be made available on there, so if you want to view it again, feel free to shoot over to rhinojungle.com, and you can view it as many times as you want. Additionally, it'll be on our website. But yeah, definitely check it out. It's free to join. Let us know what you think of it. And then, yeah, I want to thank everyone again. I don't know if either of you guys wanted to say anything real quick before we sign off.
Thanks for having us, Vince. It was a pleasure. And if anybody out there has questions, you can email tech@mcneel.com, or you can email me, brian.james@mcneel.com. And be happy to answer any questions you have on the version 5 beta of Rhino. And thanks for watching.
Yeah, great. So again, thank you guys for this presentation, and thank everyone for attending.
Vince. Thanks, everyone. Nice job, Brian.
Thanks, Pascal.
We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.